So we got a lot of questions. A lot of questions. Let's see. Sam from Kuala Lumpur. It's in KL. What were the motives of those building the tower? That's actually a really good question because, that's something because today was focused on the language part. The motive is very simple. You have to understand where it came from. Okay, and the reason, because another question people might have is, why did God want them not to build the tower? Okay, so the first thing to understand is what happened right before was the flood. And what happened at the time of the flood? What happened? The flood, the waters rose really, really high, right? So why do you think they want to build a high tower? Well, if you just went through a flood and you understand there was a flood that came that was that high, well, if you build a tower that's higher than that, then the next time a flood happens, you'll escape it. So essentially, what is it in their minds that they're trying to do? Well, the judgment came because people were away from God. And then people now should be like, oh my gosh, I should have been going to God instead. But instead, they still didn't go to God and they built a tower, which means it's something they're still believing in themselves more than they believed in God. So that's kind of the reason behind it, the motive. Cool. Let's take a look at Jenny in Kingston, Canada. Jenny says, if God wants us to be harmonious, why did he create us to be so different? That's a great question, right? If God wants us to be harmonious, why did he create us to be so different? And that's a good question because we're like, God, some people I can't stand. Some people, they just drive me up the wall. Some people, it's even my mom, or it's my son, or it's my daughter, or it's this, or it's that. One of the reasons, one of the things that you should be thankful for is that we're all different. Because the worst thing that can happen is if we're all the same. Why are we so different? Because there are so many different things to do in this world. And even for us, imagine if put it this way. Imagine if everyone was cutlery and everyone was a spoon. There was no knives, there's no forks, but everyone's a spoon, right? Then what could we get done? We can only do the job of a fork. The reason we have all these different types of people is, number one, is we are all individually different from each other, and God wants it that way because there's an individual love relationship with every person who is so different from the other. But secondly, if all of us have a different skill, you have to understand that if we actually become harmonious, you have to realize how amazing and how great of the things we're able to do, like what? Like Korea, Belgium, and an Arab company coming together and building an 828-meter tower. And we can do greater things, okay? Let's take a look at John. Lo Chang. What can we do with the environment and use it wisely? What can we do with the environment? And that's an interesting question. What can we do with the environment and use it wisely? Well, the environment, you can do many things with the environment. There's so many things. Lo Chang, I think you should maybe rephrase it, something more specific, because it's very, very general. I'm not sure what that is. So we'll get back to that. Hopefully you can rewrite that question. We'll go to John in PJ. John in PJ, also in Malaysia. How should I restart a broken relationship? Great question. If a relationship is so bad, right, that it almost feels irreparable, how do you restart it? Well, restarting something is something that both sides have to do. Both sides really have to do it, which means that my suggestion to you is both of the sides have to agree to restart it. So what does that mean? You should sit down and talk to someone seriously and say, hey, I know this is a situation that's going on. So I really want this to work, and I really want to restart this because I know it didn't start out right. And what do you think? And how do you feel about this? The one complex thing about all relationships is you cannot control the other side. That's why it's so complex. We shouldn't have expectation that someone has to forgive us or has to give us a second chance or will be willing to take a second chance, which basically means that we have to be the ones that understand I can't expect them to do that, but let's try. And it's better to sit down with them, talk to them very truthfully, and tell them, hey, this is what I want to do. And Your expectation should be no expectation. He doesn't have to. Because honestly, he doesn't. Why? It's his life. So it really depends on two people, and we really have to understand it at that level, okay? So my biggest suggestion is sit down with them and talk to them, tell them that you want to restart, and then you put it into their court, okay? Let's go down to Ameline. Was it Ameline? It's a little bit too big there. I can't see the names. Yeah, can you shrink that up, please? There you go. Okay, Ameline, go. Oof, how to understand God's heart more. We could talk about this in another study in the future, but one thing I do want to tell you is God is always revealing his heart to us all the time. He is. And he reveals his heart to us in many different ways. Sometimes through prayer you can feel it, but usually one of the greatest ways God shares with us is through experience. I'll give you an example, right? The example here is, you guys know the story of Jonah, right? The story of Jonah, God tells Jonah, go preach over there to that country, to Nineveh, that city, because, I'm going to judge them. He says, no, and he goes the other direction. And then finally, there's a shipwreck, he gets swallowed by a whale, and finally he says, all right, I'll go. And the reason he didn't want to go is because he thought they deserved judgment. He's like, God, I know you, that if I go there and preach, you're not going to judge them, but they deserve it, right? And then after he preaches for 40 days, Jonah goes up a hill, gets his popcorn ready to see the fire show. Like he's like, I need to see the judgment happen, right? And what happens is there's a vine, right, that grows behind him and gives him shade. And he's really happy. He's like, wow, this is great. I'm watching this. We're going to watch the nice light show happen. Things are going to burn. But I got shade too. What eventually happens is a worm eats the vine. And the vine eventually dies. And what happens is Jonah is pissed. He's so angry. And he's like, darn you, you vine. And then God's like, what's wrong? What's wrong, Jonah? He's like, this stupid vine giving me shade, but now, I can die. And this is what God said to him. You're so angry about this vine that died and you didn't even create it. How much more would I be upset to see my own creation get judged and die? And then what happens? He begins to realize God's heart. So in the same way too, there's a lot of times through experience, we have to realize what God is trying to tell us through that experience. Oh, God must be feeling this too. When you go through a breakup in a relationship, you get to realize what God's heart's like when people turn away from him, right? All these situations, you're able to realize God a lot more deeply. Cool. Thank you so much for that question. Let's take a look at Grace Tan. I'm not sure where she's from, but it looks like she's either from Singapore or Malaysia. Okay, probably one of those countries. It says, people's perspectives are always in their own interest. How can we change the language of heart of the people? And this is the first thing I kind of told at the very beginning is, the one thing that you cannot have expectation on, and this is what really kills people, is when you have expectation that you can change them, or that they have to change or accept what you say. And the answer is, they don't. Because of this expectation we have on other people, that's assuming that's under a big assumption that we have the power to change people. And the answer is, we don't. The language of the heart is what? It's not so much about why don't they change? Why don't they do this? The biggest thing you have to do when you come into a conversation is, I just want to understand you. And that should be your ultimate goal. It shouldn't be to win. It shouldn't be to change them. It shouldn't be any of these things. It's about understanding each other, which is the biggest thing. Like when you hear the word understanding someone's heart, learning the language of their heart, it means I have to let myself down and learn what they're saying to me. I'm learning their language, right? And that's one thing we need to do, right? We really have to be the ones that when it comes to, wow, how can we change the language of the heart of the people, right? That's not something we do. And if we had that expectation, that's when there's a lot, we get a lot of disappointment and a lot of heartache. So the first thing I do suggest from you is you have to let go of your expectations. And when it comes to learning, it means I'm learning from them. What is their language? And that's the first thing we should be doing. It's about understanding. Cool. Let's take a look at Aya Jennifer Stott in Japan. She says, what should students think or be careful during online classes? Well, I would tell you the one thing that when it comes to online classes, because I've done an online class before there was a lockdown, back in my days when I was in university, and it's really hard because it takes a lot of discipline. The one thing you don't want to do is don't do other things while the class is on. Like, what do you have to be careful of? Not getting distracted. Don't like set up your phone, turn your phone off, and focus. Don't let anyone else bother you during the online class. Why? Because during the online class, no one's watching you. That's why it's so easy for you to start doing something else. Just kind of turn it up and then start like just lying on the floor and just hanging out because no one's watching you. One thing you have to be careful about is what? Is make sure that you hold yourself to self-discipline. Okay? Let's take a look at one more question. Which one do we have here? VM May. It says, if we understand each other, why do we still fight? Because this is a good question. Because we do still fight. And one of the problems we have with fighting is, even if you understand them, you don't agree with it. Or you don't accept it. And it's something that we have to understand carefully in our minds and our hearts. Is like I said before to the last person, I believe her name was not Aya. The person before that was what's her name? Emmeline, right? We have to be the ones. It's not so much about whether I win the argument or whether I'm right or wrong. It's not the point. How do I know? Because when it comes to relationships, it's far beyond winning. I'll give you an example. If a mom and a daughter are fighting and the mom is right, okay, the mom is right, okay, and the mom and the daughter are arguing with each other, okay, and then it escalates and it becomes so bad, and the mom has a choice at this point. She can push forward and ruin the relationship, or she can sacrifice and keep the relationship intact. What would the mom do? What's more important to the mom? It's the relationship that's more important than actually winning. It is. And if you look at the relationships that we have, sometimes we get into that mindset of, I'm right and you're wrong. And you know what? You very well may be right. You very well may be right. But it doesn't mean you should push it to the end. Why? In the end, sometimes people aren't ready for the truth. They're just not. I'll give you an example. Are people who are adopted, are they ready to hear the truth when they're 5, 6, 7, 10, 12, 14? We don't know. Sometimes people aren't ready to hear the truth. Right? And that's why you have to think about what is more important at that moment. Is it being right, or is it the relationship you have with this person? And if someone is a much bigger person or more mature, they'll realize they need to sacrifice for it. And that's something I hope that a lot of us too, especially during this time of lockdown, quarantine, we just got to understand each other that a lot of people are going to be stressed. People, especially people who've lost their jobs, people might not be able to pay the bills. It's very stressful, so we have to be even more understanding at this time, okay? I'm just really grateful and thankful that all of you guys have asked these wonderful questions. There's still more questions left too, but we're out of time. I'm actually over time, so we'll see you guys again next week. This is Lockdown Tuesday, and we'll see you again next week. Have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.